For over 20 years, the DEA, FBI, and Interpol chased a ghost, a drug lord whose empire poisoned cities across America and beyond. Billions were spent. Dozens of agents failed. He slipped through every trap. But what none of them could have imagined was that the key to bringing him down wouldn't come from a task force or a SWAT team. It came from a waitress. A woman with no badge, no weapon, just a smile and a mission. Undercover, alone, and dangerously close to one of the most violent men on Earth. All it took was one dance with his disabled son to start the fall of an empire. This is the story of how the world's most untouchable criminal was finally caught, and the agent who risked everything to do it. Before we continue, kindly take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this video. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. In 2014, the name Miguel Santiago appeared on an internal FBI watch list for the first time. At the time, few people outside of specialized narcotics and organized crime units had heard of him. But those who had understood exactly what his name meant. Santiago was believed to be the new face of an evolving international drug empire, one that didn't rely on flashy weapons or cartel shootouts, but instead operated through silence, strategy, and precision. He never appeared on social media. He never made direct contact with known traffickers. And yet, his influence extended from ports in Central America to cities across the United States. For nearly a decade, federal agencies tried and failed to collect hard evidence on him. Nothing stuck. Every wiretap led to a dead end. Every suspect that got close either disappeared or turned up with no useful intel. Inside FBI circles, Santiago earned a chilling nickname, the Ghost. Agents believed that Santiago used layers of middlemen, shell companies, and offshore accounts to stay invisible. He lived in luxury, but never under his real name. He moved across properties, countries, and legal identities so frequently that even Interpol struggled to pin down his true location. By 2017, DEA field reports suggested that his operations had shifted to a low-profile mansion outside of Austin, Texas. The property, registered under a fake name, was heavily guarded, monitored by silent security teams, and used for private gatherings that no cameras ever captured. That estate became the focus of a growing federal task force, bringing together agents from the FBI, DEA, Homeland Security, and local law enforcement. Surveillance was nearly impossible. Drones were spotted and disabled. Camera footage disappeared. Phone signals were jammed within a half-mile radius. The man running this empire didn't just avoid attention, he erased it before it began. Traditional tactics had failed. The FBI needed something different. In 2019, the FBI launched what would become one of its most classified domestic undercover missions in years. The mission's internal codename, Operation Ghost Net. The idea was simple but risky. Embed a deep cover operative inside Santiago's private world and build a case from the inside out. The mission would take years. It would require someone who could live a false identity, become invisible to the criminals around her, and win the trust of one of the most dangerous men alive. The Bureau knew this kind of assignment wasn't for just any agent. They needed someone skilled, calm under pressure, and capable of playing a role so completely that even Santiago's closest guards wouldn't suspect her. The choice was clear: Special Agent Maya Reese. A quiet, methodical investigator with a strong record in infiltration and behavioral analysis. She had no family ties, no social media, no background that could trace back to the agency. She was ready. The name Diana Lopez first appeared in official employment records in March 2020. According to paperwork filed with the Texas Department of Labor, she was a recent hire by Cedar Grove Hospitality with no prior full-time work experience in the state. Her references included names that couldn't be reached, old addresses that had been torn down, and one phone number that led to a disconnected line. To most employers, this might have raised red flags. But Cedar Grove served wealthy clients who valued discretion more than background checks. Diana was quiet, respectful, and showed up on time. That was enough. No one there knew that Diana Lopez didn't exist. She had been created by the FBI, piece by piece, down to the utility bills and grocery receipts. Behind her plain clothes and quiet eyes was Special Agent Maya Reese, a highly trained operative tasked with infiltrating one of the most secretive drug empires in the United States. Before Maya became Diana, she underwent a full identity wipe. Her real bank accounts were frozen. Her family was relocated temporarily under safety protocols. Even her digital fingerprints, social media, old school records, and driver's license files were erased or sealed. She was no longer Maya Reese, the agent. She became Diana, the woman with no history. Her apartment was arranged by the Bureau, a small one-bedroom unit in a rundown neighborhood just far enough from Santiago's estate to avoid suspicion, but close enough for a short commute. The walls were bare, the shelves empty, the refrigerator filled with simple food items chosen to match the life she was pretending to live. She kept to herself, spoke little to neighbors, and took public buses rather than drive. At work, she didn't try to make friends. She kept her head down and focused on her tasks. She was invisible. And in this mission, that was her greatest weapon. The FBI trained her for months before she was deployed. She studied restaurant etiquette, learned how to hold a tray without trembling, and practiced working 12-hour shifts without showing fatigue. But more importantly, she trained her mind. Undercover work wasn't about costumes. It was about becoming someone else completely. Maya couldn't just play a waitress, she had to be one. That meant forgetting her past, her habits, and even her instincts. She learned to walk with smaller steps, to speak in a slightly higher voice, and to never look people directly in the eye unless invited to. The role was psychological. She was no longer the woman with a badge. She was the woman with a mop, a stack of plates, and no power. The Bureau drilled her to respond to Diana automatically, to fill out time cards without hesitation, and to fake casual boredom in staff meetings. If anyone ever tested her story, she had to pass. At first, her shifts were mostly standard. She worked high-end dinner parties, corporate events, and private functions where her job was to remain unnoticed. Her goal was to be good enough to be trusted, but never memorable enough to be talked about. She kept a small journal hidden under her mattress, where she logged patterns, how long guests stayed, who arrived early, and who whispered in corners. She wasn't allowed to take photos or use any devices that could expose her. All intel had to be stored in her memory and passed through dead drops set up in cleaning supply closets and false walls inside her apartment. If something ever happened to her, handlers could still access what she had seen. Over time, her calm presence earned her a quiet reputation. She was the waitress who never complained. The one who stayed late to clean without being asked. Eventually, she was assigned to special events. That's when everything changed. One Thursday evening, Diana received a new schedule, private weekend service at an estate north of Austin. No address was listed, only a pickup location and a time. When she asked what the event was, the manager shrugged. Private client. Top dollar. Don't be late. Her heart rate picked up. This could be it. She arrived at the meeting point just before 5 p.m., where a black SUV waited with tinted windows. 2 other staff members sat inside, eyes forward. No one spoke during the drive. When the vehicle stopped, Diana stepped out to see the estate for the first time. It wasn't massive, but it was quiet, hidden behind large metal gates and tall trees. Cameras blinked quietly from every corner. The driveway was spotless. Armed security guards stood near the entrance, scanning each person with handheld devices. One guard asked her name. Diana Lopez, she said calmly. He nodded and let her through. Inside, the estate felt more like a secure embassy than a home. Walls were thick. Doors locked automatically. Music played softly from built-in speakers, but the mood was tense. The staff was given strict instructions. No phones, no wandering, no speaking to guests unless addressed first. Diana followed orders. She was assigned to serve drinks in the outer lounge and assist with kitchen cleanup. For 4 hours, she watched as expensive liquor was poured, quiet conversations happened in short bursts, and security teams walked the hallways in slow, precise rotations. She noted exits, the movement patterns of guards, and the symbols on the crates in the garage. One box had a logo from a shipping company the FBI already suspected of laundering cartel money. She made a mental note. At 11 p.m., a man entered. He didn't introduce himself. But from the way others reacted, standing straighter, lowering their heads, Diana knew this was Miguel Santiago himself. He was shorter than expected, dressed in a simple black suit with polished shoes. His face showed no emotion. He walked through the lounge like a man who controlled everything, saying little, but hearing everything. When he passed by Diana, he didn't look at her. That was good. She didn't want to be noticed, yet. He entered a side room and was gone for almost an hour. When he returned, he left immediately, escorted by 2 silent guards. That night, Diana wrote her first full report. It was handwritten, then transferred into a micro-coded format and delivered through a fake bottle of kitchen cleaner in the storage room. Her handlers received it 48 hours later. Her message was clear: he's real. I've seen him. Security is tight. I need more time. The Bureau authorized full continuation of Operation Ghost Net. For the first time in years, they had someone inside Santiago's world. Over the next few weeks, Diana became a regular face at the estate. She never spoke unless spoken to, but she started learning names: guards, drivers, kitchen managers. She learned who carried keys and who followed orders without asking questions. One guard, named Carlos, always took an extra-long smoke break near the west exit. Another, Rosa, frequently double-checked door locks, suggesting she didn't fully trust her co-workers. Diana also started mapping the layout of the estate in her mind, where the high-security rooms were, which walls seemed soundproofed, and how the shipment trucks backed in at midnight every Thursday. Each detail, no matter how small, was added to her reports. The Bureau started connecting pieces. They began noticing how trucks disappeared into distribution chains linked to unsolved overdose cases across 4 states. They traced the shipping company from the garage to dummy corporations in Panama. But all of this depended on Diana's eyes and ears inside the house. What no one saw coming, what even Diana couldn't have predicted, was the introduction of a new person to the estate. One evening in early 2021, a black car pulled into the driveway and stopped quietly near the back entrance. A young boy stepped out, escorted by 2 guards. He was no older than 9, with dark hair, quiet eyes, and metal braces on both legs. He moved slowly, one foot dragging slightly behind the other. The staff paused. Most had never seen a child here before. The boy was taken inside through a private hallway. That night, Diana watched as Santiago entered the lounge and sat beside the boy, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. For the first time, the ghost smiled. The boy was introduced only as Nico. He didn't speak to staff. He didn't go outside. But every few weeks, he returned. Diana began to understand. This was Miguel Santiago's secret son. This changed everything. The FBI had never confirmed whether Santiago had children. The birth certificate didn't exist. There were no school records, no hospital visits under his name. Nico wasn't just hidden from the world, he was hidden from intelligence databases. And that raised new questions. Was the boy being protected or imprisoned? Did he know who his father really was? Diana began watching more carefully during his visits. Nico was quiet, well-behaved, and fascinated by music. He often sat near the piano and listened for hours. One evening, as soft jazz played, he slowly approached Diana with a surprising request. "Will you dance with me?" Every guard froze. The room fell silent. Diana's mind raced. This wasn't part of any protocol. But she responded calmly, "Of course." They danced. Slowly, Carefully. Santiago watched without speaking. The moment lasted less than 2 minutes. But it would change the entire operation, and Diana's place inside it forever. By the time the FBI confirmed that Nico Santiago was Miguel's biological child, the agency's interest in the case shifted dramatically. For nearly a decade, Miguel Santiago had remained out of reach. But now, the discovery of his secret son raised new possibilities. If there was one weakness in the armor of a man known for paranoia, silence, and control, it would be his child. Up until this moment, Santiago had kept his criminal empire running through absolute secrecy. He trusted no one. He used aliases, rotated his inner circle, and moved between properties. But no man could control the bond between a father and son. Special Agent Maya Reese, still living under the name Diana Lopez, had danced with the boy, and in doing so, had created an emotional link that no handler, no wiretap, and no satellite drone could have ever accomplished. The question now wasn't whether Santiago would notice her. He already had. After the brief dance, Diana returned to her regular duties, careful not to overstep or interact further with Nico unless prompted. But the dynamic within the estate subtly changed. She began receiving higher priority shifts. She was moved from hallway service to closer proximity inside private lounges, and eventually into dining areas where only trusted staff were allowed. The guards stopped watching her so closely. The maids, once cold and quiet, started whispering her name like someone they should remember. Santiago didn't speak to her, not directly, but he now paused when walking past her. His silence, in Diana's world, spoke volumes. For a man known to dismiss or ignore most people around him, his acknowledgement meant something. The Bureau took note. Maya's mission had just entered a critical stage. She was now operating inside the emotional space of her target, a dangerous place to be, but also the most effective position for gathering intelligence. Behind the scenes, the FBI and DEA worked quickly to build a new psychological profile of Santiago. Prior to this, most assessments portrayed him as a cold strategist, a man who operated purely on logic and fear. But Nico's existence suggested something different. The boy wasn't just a family member. He was hidden, protected, possibly even loved. Santiago's rare smile during the dance, the way he positioned himself between Nico and the rest of the room, and the sudden shift in Diana's status all hinted at an emotional vulnerability. Analysts debated the implications. Was Nico a tool, used to gain sympathy from partners? Or was he truly the one person Santiago allowed into his life without a filter? Regardless, the presence of the boy gave the FBI an opportunity. If Santiago saw Diana as someone safe around Nico, she could potentially gain access to parts of the estate and the operation previously unreachable. Diana's internal reports confirmed what the Bureau feared and hoped for. Nico was not being raised like other children. He didn't attend school. No tutors were seen entering or leaving. He didn't play with toys. He sat quietly, listened to music, and followed directions without question. When he spoke, it was brief, polite, and rehearsed. His leg braces, according to Diana, appeared custom-made, but worn out, suggesting they hadn't been upgraded in some time. This confused agents. Santiago had near-limitless funds. Why wouldn't he ensure the best treatment for his son? One theory emerged. The boy's disability wasn't being treated because his father didn't trust medical professionals. No clinics. No records. No risk of exposure. Diana began logging every interaction with Nico, from the books he read to the music he preferred. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Nico was highly observant. He mimicked behavior quickly. And most importantly, he responded best to kindness, something few people in that house gave him. One evening, Diana was tasked with bringing a glass of water to Santiago's study, a rare assignment. Inside, she found Nico seated on the floor, working through a puzzle, while Santiago typed silently at a desk. Diana placed the glass carefully on a tray near him and turned to leave, but Santiago stopped her. "He likes the piano," he said, still typing. "Can you play?" The question felt more like a test than a request. Diana paused. "A little," she answered, simply. Santiago nodded once. "Show him something next time." Then he waved her away. That moment, brief as it was, marked her first direct exchange with a man she had spent nearly a year trying to reach. It was also the first time he had connected her presence to his son. That connection, carefully earned and dangerously delicate, was now the FBI's most valuable tool in building a case that had gone cold for years. Over the next month, Diana's interactions with Nico slowly increased. She remained careful, always following his lead. When he approached her, she responded gently. When he stayed silent, she gave him space. He began asking questions about music, weather, even birds. They weren't deep conversations, but they were real. Santiago, observing from a distance, allowed it. Soon, Diana was being asked to assist during Nico's visits. She helped him walk down hallways, guided him through garden paths, and even adjusted his leg braces when they slipped. Each moment built more trust, not just from the boy, but from his father. Diana's reports described a growing sense of responsibility. She no longer felt like she was only gathering evidence. She was now protecting someone vulnerable, someone caught in a world he couldn't escape. The FBI reminded her to stay focused. "He's not your mission," one handler warned. "The father is." But Diana knew that, in many ways, they were both connected. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, agents were analyzing new data provided through Diana's surveillance. The mansion's entry logs, guest arrival times, and hidden delivery patterns were finally starting to make sense. Each time Nico visited the estate, there was a noticeable drop in high-level meetings. Santiago kept operations quieter when his son was around. It was a security pattern the FBI could use. If they could control when Nico visited, they could potentially control the environment inside the estate, and possibly schedule a raid or sting operation without endangering the boy. But to do that, they needed more influence. Diana would have to go deeper. She would need to be invited into the estate beyond service roles, into private quarters, personal conversations, and potentially into rooms where real decisions were made. The only way to do that, the Bureau agreed, was to increase Santiago's trust in her, by proving she could be more than just a waitress. That opportunity came during a tense afternoon in spring 2022. Nico had been dropped off unexpectedly at the estate while Diana was off duty. The staff was caught off guard, and Santiago had not arrived yet. According to witness reports, Nico began walking through the garden path alone. Somewhere near the stone steps, he tripped. His left brace snapped, and he hit the ground hard. The staff panicked, unsure whether to intervene. At that moment, Diana entered the estate for her scheduled evening shift. Seeing the boy in pain, she rushed to him without asking permission. She lifted him carefully, adjusted the broken strap, and carried him back inside. Security moved in quickly, but Nico, crying quietly, clung to her shoulder. When Santiago arrived minutes later, he saw the scene. His son, injured but comforted, held in the arms of the only person in the house who acted without fear. Santiago didn't say a word. He simply nodded. That nod changed everything. The following morning, Diana received a message through a house assistant. Report to the main quarters at 10 a.m. alone. This area had previously been off-limits to all staff. That same day, the Bureau received a coded alert from Diana confirming she was entering restricted space. Inside the main quarters, she was introduced to a new role. Santiago had decided that Nico needed regular care while visiting, and Diana had been chosen to provide it. She would now operate as his personal companion, more than a nanny, less than a guardian. It was a role that would require her presence during high-level family moments, quiet meetings, and possibly during travel. She would live closer to the family wing and be assigned new duties, all under Santiago's approval. For the FBI, this was the breakthrough they had hoped for. Diana was no longer part of the staff. She was now inside the family. But with that new position came new risks. Santiago's trust had been extended, but not without limits. New rules were given. Diana could no longer speak freely to other staff. She was not to leave the estate without clearance. Her apartment was to be monitored by new house security. The Bureau recognized this immediately. Santiago was testing her. If she failed, there would be no second chance. Diana's handlers revised the communication protocols. All dead drops were suspended. Reports would now be passed through encrypted physical notes embedded in Nico's therapy books, an idea Diana herself suggested. It was dangerous, but it worked. Over the next 6 weeks, she began recording not just Nico's behavior, but Santiago's movement patterns, office activity, and guest access. She described a private vault near Santiago's study, hidden behind a wall panel. She logged the codes used to enter meeting rooms. She noted names, aliases, companies, times, hand signals. Slowly, the ghost was becoming real. For the first time, the FBI had a living window into Santiago's world. And it was through his son. Nico, unaware of the mission, had become the key to everything. Diana, though still focused on her objective, began to feel the emotional weight of her role. Each time she helped Nico walk, each time he asked her to read to him, she saw a child, innocent, trapped, and growing up inside a criminal empire. She couldn't change who his father was. But maybe, she thought, she could help change his future. As Operation GhostNet entered its second year, one truth became clear. This case would not be solved by force or speed. It would be solved by trust, earned slowly, held carefully, and risked at great cost. And in the center of it all, standing between the FBI and one of the world's most wanted men, was a quiet boy with metal braces and a heart full of questions. By the summer of 2022, Special Agent Maya Reese, still working under the alias Diana Lopez, had done what no federal operative before her had achieved. She was now embedded within the inner family circle of Miguel Santiago, the man believed to be the most untouchable drug lord in North America. Her relationship with Santiago's disabled son Nico had granted her more than just access. It gave her presence, trust, and visibility in places where even longtime staff were forbidden. No longer just a waitress, Diana had become part of Santiago's private household operations, spending hours inside the mansion's most restricted areas. This included Santiago's personal wing, a section of the estate secured by digital locks, private guards, and a rotating entry code that changed every 2 days. To the outside world, she was still invisible. But inside the lion's den, she was now walking directly through the belly of the beast. The FBI monitored this advancement with a mix of caution and urgency. Diana had spent nearly 2 years cultivating this position, but now the stakes were higher than ever. A single misstep could expose her, put Nico in danger, and destroy Operation GhostNet permanently. Her reports, now smuggled through encrypted messages placed inside Nico's therapy books, began to detail a side of Santiago no agent had ever witnessed. He wasn't just a cold criminal mastermind. He was meticulous, structured, and deeply paranoid. Every phone call he made was on a landline connected to a voice distortion system. All laptops inside the mansion were wiped weekly by in-house tech specialists. Meetings were scheduled without written records, and documents were never left unattended. Santiago rarely used the same room twice for important conversations. Even his closest advisors didn't always know where he would be at a given hour. He trusted no one, not even the men who ran his own security. Diana observed that Santiago's mansion was built with surveillance and evasion in mind. Hidden corridors linked different wings of the estate, allowing Santiago to move between rooms unseen. Pressure sensors beneath the floors could detect unfamiliar footsteps. Emergency shut-off buttons were embedded into the walls, allowing entire wings to lock down in seconds. The dining room was bug-free, but only because Santiago used it strictly for family meals or small performances for Nico. His study, however, was a different story. Diana was able to confirm the location of a secret vault behind the bookcase, accessed by a biometric fingerprint scanner and a coded keypad. She also observed at least 3 different safes throughout the property, one of which was kept in Santiago's private garage beneath the house. The garage, converted into a makeshift archive, held hard copy ledgers, briefcases, and unidentified packages labeled with international shipping codes. These findings would become critical in building the legal case. Despite the danger, Diana's calm, patient demeanor continued to pay off. Nico now depended on her for emotional and physical support during his visits. Santiago trusted her to help with his therapy, learning routines, and even daily meals. Slowly, Diana was allowed to assist with more logistical responsibilities, such as scheduling private drivers, preparing travel bags, and even receiving encrypted shipments that arrived under coded names. One shipment, logged in her report as Package 11 Delta, arrived in a truck with a frozen meat company logo. Inside were 4 boxes containing layered documents and electronic devices, which Santiago stored in the main vault. Diana memorized the labels, identifying a false company that had already been flagged in a separate DEA trafficking case in Arizona. That small detail tied Santiago directly to a case still open in another state. It was the first real thread the FBI could pull that connected his base in Texas to operations across state lines. By fall, Diana's cover was deeper than ever. She was now responsible for daily communication logs between Santiago and his offshore contacts, though she never handled the messages directly. Instead, she was instructed to hand-deliver sealed envelopes and USB drives to a trusted courier known only as Andres. This man, in his 50s, rarely spoke and always wore gloves. Santiago referred to him simply as the runner. Diana's observations about Andres added another crucial piece to the puzzle. She noticed that he arrived on days when certain guests had previously visited, mainly foreign businessmen who claimed to represent construction or logistics firms. However, none of them ever discussed building projects. Instead, their meetings with Santiago lasted under 15 minutes and often ended with the men leaving empty-handed but smiling. The Bureau began tracking these men. Through flight records and hotel logs, they confirmed several were involved in offshore banking and fake import-export businesses. The web was growing. Santiago's paranoia extended to his personal habits as well. He didn't eat anything that hadn't been tasted by a tester first. He rotated sleeping quarters every 3 days. He avoided taking the same route twice when traveling, even within his own property. Diana noted that each vehicle he used was registered under a different name and kept in climate-controlled garages to avoid wear and tear. On days when Nico wasn't present, Santiago often retreated into silence, spending hours alone in his study. Diana suspected he was working on financial reports or reviewing surveillance footage, but she never saw the screens directly. What she did observe was a whiteboard filled with notes in code, a mixture of letters, numbers, and symbols. With help from bureau cryptologists, she began replicating small parts of the whiteboard onto napkins, slipping them into Nico's books. Over time, analysts managed to decode pieces of the pattern, linking it to bank accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Diana also began noticing signs of inner tension within Santiago's operation. One of the security chiefs, known as Elias, was quietly replaced after a disagreement during a shipment arrival. No explanation was given. Staff were instructed never to mention his name again. A new bodyguard, taller and more aggressive, appeared in his place and began watching Diana more closely. His name was Bruno. He asked questions she had never heard before. Where did you work before here? Why does the boy like you so much? Diana deflected with calm, practiced responses. But she knew the pressure was increasing. Santiago's operation, while strong on the surface, was beginning to show signs of stress. The FBI believed this was likely due to growing attention from other federal branches and international agencies. Santiago may have sensed the walls closing in, even if he didn't know yet that someone inside was feeding information to the very people trying to bring him down. The FBI began preparing for next steps. With Diana's information, they could now map Santiago's estate layout, identify regular patterns of movement, confirm offshore accounts, and list at least 12 business fronts tied to money laundering and distribution. But the Bureau also knew they couldn't rush the operation. If Diana was exposed, the entire mission would collapse, and Santiago would disappear again. They needed one more move. Something that would allow Diana to maintain her role while pulling Santiago further into the open. That opportunity arrived through an idea Diana herself proposed. She suggested that Nico be introduced to a special therapy program outside the estate, one designed for children with mobility challenges. The program, she said, could help Nico walk independently, build confidence, and possibly reduce Santiago's fear of exposure by offering legitimate treatment outside the criminal compound. Santiago was hesitant, but after several days, he agreed. The condition: Diana would oversee everything, and he would approve the location. The FBI had never intended to create a real rehabilitation center, but with Operation GhostNet entering its final phase, the Bureau made a strategic decision: build a facility that would serve two purposes: therapeutic legitimacy for Santiago's son Nico, and tactical advantage for federal agents. Thus, Freedom Steps was born. The center was constructed in just under 4 months, using a private shell donation from a fake health charity and coordinated through off-the-record contracts. The building sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood in central Austin. From the outside, it looked like a non-profit therapy space for children with mobility issues. Inside, however, it was wired with full surveillance, hidden cameras, directional microphones, reinforced walls, and biometric entry logs. Every visitor's movements would be recorded. The staff was a mix of real physical therapists and highly trained undercover agents. The moment Santiago stepped inside those walls, his empire would no longer belong to him. It would belong to the Bureau. Diana, still posing as the trusted caretaker of Nico Santiago, played a vital role in the center's creation. She suggested its name, helped design the layout to make it feel authentic, and even handpicked equipment based on Nico's known physical needs. The FBI gave her full operational freedom, within safety limits, to shape the program's image. Flyers were printed. A small website was built. It all had to appear legitimate, even to outside observers. But its real purpose was far more complex. Each hallway included signal jammers to block outside communication. The children's therapy rooms were fitted with one-way mirrors. Even the water dispensers were bugged. Diana's handlers briefed her daily on new procedures. She was no longer just an informant inside a criminal estate. She was now also a bait handler, coordinating the slow, careful draw of a multi-million-dollar criminal leader into a legal trap designed to look like hope. It was one of the most sensitive operations in FBI history. Nico responded to the facility almost immediately. On his first day, he smiled more than anyone had ever seen. He engaged with other children, participated in guided stretches, and even tried a short obstacle path under supervision. The therapists, some real and some undercover, praised his attention and bravery. Santiago arrived late that afternoon, unannounced. He wore plain clothes, walked through the building slowly, and said nothing, but he watched every corner. He stood in the parent observation room with folded arms and made eye contact with no one. Diana remained by Nico's side the entire time, guiding him gently but giving him space. When the session ended, Santiago approached. "He likes it here," he said quietly. "We'll continue." That sentence confirmed what the FBI had hoped. Santiago had approved the facility as a safe zone. For a man as paranoid and cautious as he was, this meant trust had reached its highest possible level. The trap had officially been set. Over the next several weeks, Santiago visited Freedom Steps a total of 6 times. Each visit was carefully logged, his path tracked from entrance to exit. The Bureau noted which rooms he lingered in, who he spoke to, and what materials he handled. Diana provided context in her reports, explaining small behavior shifts. When he seemed relaxed, when he appeared distracted, or when he seemed unusually tense. One of the most telling moments came when Santiago approached a therapist and asked about Nico's future. "Will he ever walk without braces?" he asked. The therapist responded carefully, explaining that progress was possible but would take time. Santiago didn't respond. He simply stared at the therapy floor, then nodded once and walked away. Analysts believed that this moment revealed something unexpected: vulnerability. Santiago, the man who controlled everything in his world with an iron grip, was now asking questions he couldn't answer with money or fear. The FBI began preparing the final phase of the takedown. Freedom Steps was gradually transformed into a controlled environment for evidence gathering. Every interaction between Diana and Santiago was catalogued. A second floor was quietly constructed to serve as an observation and command center, hidden behind soundproof walls. It included a direct connection to FBI Field Command, legal advisors, and live translation teams. The Bureau knew that when the moment came, they would only get one chance. Santiago had escaped capture before, including 2 failed international sting attempts. He had walked away from laundering charges, disappeared before raids, and erased trails left by paid informants. This time, the FBI wanted the arrest to be public, undeniable, and impossible to legally challenge. Freedom Steps wasn't just bait. It was a courtroom, a recording device, and a news camera all in one. The goal wasn't just arrest, it was exposure. The kind that would tear down his network from the inside out. The Bureau called this phase Project Spotlight. But the closer Diana got to the finish line, the more personal the mission became. Nico's progress was real. Each week, he grew stronger. He laughed more, asked more questions, and began building small friendships. He started asking about music again, even singing during stretching exercises. Diana, torn between her duty and her emotions, documented everything. But she also found herself feeling protective in a way she hadn't expected. Nico wasn't just an access point anymore. He was a child she knew. A child she cared about. A child trapped between a life he didn't choose and a father who, despite his crimes, seemed to genuinely love him. Diana's handlers noticed the emotional shift. They warned her to stay focused. "The boy isn't the mission," one agent reminded her during a late-night call. "Santiago is." But Diana knew the truth. They were both the mission now, one for justice, the other for protection. And she was standing between them. Inside Santiago's empire, things were beginning to fray. Diana reported rising tension at the estate. Some staff members were replaced. New security personnel arrived, unannounced and without names. Santiago started asking more questions about travel times, schedules, and even Nico's therapy center. Diana remained calm, but careful. She maintained the image of loyal companion and professional caretaker, never overstepping her role. But the change in Santiago's behavior worried her. He was preparing for something. The Bureau suspected he was moving assets, possibly preparing an escape route. They accelerated their plans. A public performance was scheduled at Freedom Steps, a therapy exhibition where parents, therapists, and children would celebrate progress made over the past few months. Santiago confirmed attendance. It would be Nico's first time performing basic movement exercises in front of a crowd. The event would be quiet, media-free, and invitation only. But what Santiago didn't know was that every guest, every cameraman, and every chair would be part of the operation. The night before the event, Diana didn't sleep. She reviewed every signal cue, every plan, and every emergency response option. Nico had rehearsed for days. His goal was simple: take 3 assisted steps in front of the audience, using a light crutch. For him, it was a personal victory. For the FBI, it was the moment the trap would spring. Santiago would be present, relaxed, focused on his son, not his surroundings. Diana had one task: to keep him calm, seated, and unaware of what was unfolding around him. Undercover agents posing as parents would surround him. His guards would be delayed by technical problems at the gate. The moment Nico took his third step, a signal would be sent to the command center. Santiago would be arrested within seconds. The moment was symbolic. The boy taking his first steps, independent, unguarded, while his father lost control for the first time in decades. The plan was risky, but it was ready. The exhibition day arrived with quiet anticipation. Freedom Steps was filled with soft music, balloons, and light chatter. Santiago entered through a side door, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He sat near the front, not speaking, his eyes locked on Nico. Diana guided the boy gently to the stage. Cameras hidden in flower pots and light fixtures began streaming live to FBI command. Every corner of the building was under watch. Nico took a breath, stepped forward, and lifted one foot. The brace wobbled, but he balanced. The room held its breath. A second step followed, then a third. Santiago stood, visibly moved, clapping once before pausing. At that exact moment, the signal was sent. Within seconds, plainclothes agents surrounded Santiago. He turned, confused, then furious. But it was too late. His guards were already subdued at the entrance. His phone was seized. His jacket searched. As Nico reached his final pose on stage, his father was escorted out the back in handcuffs. The arrest was quiet but powerful. Cameras never stopped rolling. The agents used practiced precision. Santiago didn't fight. He stared at Diana, expression unreadable. She looked back, silent. No words were exchanged. Nico remained unaware, finishing his routine and waving to the crowd. The audience clapped, not knowing what had just happened. Within 5 minutes, Santiago was placed in a secured vehicle and driven to a classified federal holding facility. Freedom Steps continued the performance, allowing Nico and the other children to celebrate their progress without fear or confusion. Diana excused herself quietly, leaving the event floor and entering the control room upstairs. She looked at the live feed, Santiago, sitting alone, face blank, hands cuffed. The ghost had fallen. Not by force. Not by a gun. But by trust. By a child. And by a woman who had become part of both their lives. The mission was complete. But the consequences were just beginning. Miguel Santiago's arrest at Freedom Steps was one of the quietest takedowns in recent FBI history, but also one of the most important. There were no sirens, no shouting, no public spectacle. Instead, a man who had built a drug empire on secrecy and fear was walked out of a children's therapy center in silence. The world didn't know it yet, but one of the most powerful figures in international drug trafficking was now in federal custody. Inside the Bureau's Austin field office, the mood was tense. Operation Ghost Net had succeeded, but the work was far from over. The FBI had one shot to make the case stick. It wasn't enough to arrest Santiago. They needed to prove that his empire stretched across states and borders, that his wealth came from illegal activity, and that the people under him were part of a criminal network. And they needed to do it before his lawyers struck back. Back at Freedom Steps, the show went on. Most of the audience had no idea anything unusual had happened. Nico completed his performance with grace, stepping into place beside 2 other children and bowing quietly. Cameras flashed. Parents clapped. Diana smiled at him from the edge of the stage, holding back emotion. She knew that the moment Santiago was taken away, the mission changed again. Nico's protection became priority. Now that his father was in custody, he would become a target, not just emotionally, but legally. Any lawyer worth their name would try to challenge the arrest by arguing unlawful entrapment, use of a minor, or even psychological manipulation. The FBI's legal team began reviewing every part of the operation, looking for holes, anything Santiago's defense could use. They found none. Every move had been approved. Every word recorded. Every step followed protocol. But they knew one fact clearly: Santiago wasn't finished fighting. He was just getting started. Within 48 hours, news of Santiago's arrest began to leak. It started with whispers in law enforcement circles, then hit local news channels. Reporters swarmed the area around Freedom Steps, trying to get footage, quotes, or confirmation. The Bureau issued a short press release: "An individual of interest connected to an ongoing federal investigation has been detained for questioning." But by the end of the week, international headlines told the full story. Ghost drug lord caught at children's rehab center. Billionaire kingpin arrested in FBI sting. Photos of Santiago, led away in handcuffs, flooded social media. His image, once mythical and unseen, was now public. That exposure sent shockwaves through criminal networks across the country. Several of Santiago's known associates vanished overnight. 2 offshore accounts were emptied. Warehouses tied to his businesses shut down. Local law enforcement in other cities began reporting suspicious disappearances and burned documents. The ghost had been unmasked, and his empire was trying to bury the truth. But the FBI was ready. Thanks to Diana's years of undercover work, the agency had a detailed blueprint of Santiago's operations. Each alias, fake company, and shipment route had been recorded. Within a week, federal agents executed 31 simultaneous raids across 4 states. They seized computers, hard drives, bank records, and controlled substances. 10 key lieutenants were arrested. 3 turned informant. More than $60 million in assets were frozen. But it was one discovery in Santiago's private vault that changed the scope of the case entirely. Inside a small folder marked Legacy were handwritten notes, ledgers, and contracts showing payments to public officials, international contacts, and even a few law enforcement officers. Santiago had not just built a drug empire, he had built a protection system around it. This turned the case from a trafficking charge into a potential federal corruption investigation. The Department of Justice formed a task force to handle the new charges. The case now had global attention. Inside the FBI, Diana's identity was still classified. Most agents involved in the raids had no idea who she was or how central she had been to the case. But within her small circle of handlers, there was quiet respect. She had survived nearly 3 years undercover, developed the only known access point to Santiago's inner world, and executed her part of the mission without failure. But Diana herself wasn't celebrating. Her thoughts stayed with Nico. After the arrest, the boy had been taken into protective care under an alias. He didn't understand what had happened. One moment, he was dancing on stage. The next, his father was gone, and his home vanished. He asked for Diana repeatedly. The Bureau allowed her one supervised visit. It was short, no questions, no explanations. Just 1 hour. Nico cried when he saw her. She didn't cry. She couldn't. "You're safe now," she said softly. "And you're strong." It was all she was allowed to say. Outside the protected care facility, Diana's work wasn't over. The Bureau had requested she assist in the final review of evidence. Because of her access to Santiago's vault, her memory and documentation were critical in building the prosecution's case. But she was also instructed to begin separating emotionally. "He's not your responsibility," one handler reminded her. "The boy. He's in our care now." Diana nodded. But inside, she struggled. For years, her entire life had revolved around 2 things: building trust with Santiago and protecting Nico. Now both were gone. Her apartment was cleaned out. Her phone number was deactivated. Her real name would be restored, but her old life couldn't return. The FBI offered her extended leave or a reassignment to a desk role. She declined both. "I need time," she said. "Just time." She didn't go back to Quantico. She disappeared, off the radar, under protection, just like the people she once observed. But she left behind one final report. That report, declassified months later, was simply titled, "The Dance." It described in detail the moment when Nico had asked her to dance in the estate lounge, how every agent held their breath, how every security guard froze, and how that moment had become the first opening into Santiago's world. Diana wrote, "He didn't ask out of fear or obedience. He asked because he wanted connection." In that moment, the operation became more than evidence gathering. It became a question of what kind of future we're fighting for. Those words were later quoted in a Department of Justice ceremony honoring the mission. Operation GhostNet became a training model for deep cover work, and Freedom Steps, once built as a front, was turned into a fully funded, real rehabilitation center for children with physical challenges. It was no longer just bait. It became something lasting. Something real. Something Diana had unknowingly helped build not just for the case, but for children like Nico. Back in federal court, Santiago's legal team launched their defense. They claimed coercion, mental manipulation, and illegal surveillance. They accused the FBI of using a child as bait. But with over 2 years of documented procedures, audio recordings, coded reports, and verified surveillance, the case was solid. The prosecution laid out Santiago's entire empire, money trails, shipment logs, front companies, and personal admissions made to Diana, all without force or entrapment. Several of his lieutenants took plea deals, testifying against him in court. It was the first time in over a decade that a federal jury heard testimony about Santiago's operations from inside his own mansion. The defense tried to discredit Diana, but her name remained sealed under protection. Her reports spoke for themselves. On the 19th day of the trial, Miguel Santiago was found guilty on 18 counts, including conspiracy to traffic, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and endangering a minor. He was sentenced to life without parole. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. Santiago showed no reaction. He stood, was handcuffed, and walked away, as quietly as he had lived. But for the people he hurt, the lives lost to his drugs, the communities poisoned by his reach, the verdict brought a measure of justice. And for Nico, now living with a new guardian family under a sealed identity, the sentence meant freedom, even if he didn't yet understand it. Diana was not in the courtroom. She had declined the invitation. Instead, she stood in the back of a therapy room at the Real Freedom Step Center, watching another child take their first unsteady steps across the padded floor. No one there knew her story. No one asked. But when the music began playing, and a small boy laughed while trying to find his balance, she smiled. The dance wasn't over. It was just beginning, for every child who finally got the chance to walk forward. The conviction of Miguel Santiago made headlines across the world. For years, his name had been a mystery whispered in law enforcement briefings and redacted intelligence files. Now it was printed in bold letters on front pages: Ghost drug lord sentenced to life without parole. Major media outlets aired segments on the takedown, calling it one of the most successful undercover operations in modern FBI history. The public finally saw images of the man once known only through code names and rumors. The courtroom sketches, the surveillance photos, the footage of him being led away in cuffs, these became symbols of a case that proved even the most protected criminal empires could fall. But inside the FBI, there was no celebration. The operation had taken 3 years, involved over 100 agents across multiple agencies, and required risking the life of an undercover operative. The mission had succeeded, but the damage it left behind was harder to measure. In the months following the trial, federal agencies began dismantling Santiago's remaining operations. Many of his lieutenants were already behind bars or had disappeared, but the infrastructure he left behind, laundering networks, dummy corporations, secret accounts, was still active. The Department of Justice created a joint task force, Operation Ember, to trace Santiago's financial pathways and shut down every remaining element of his global network. Asset recovery teams moved quickly. Over $240 million in hidden bank accounts was seized. 4 private planes were located and impounded in Mexico and Panama. Dozens of properties across Texas, Florida, and Colombia were frozen under international seizure laws. Agents interviewed former employees, partners, and even competitors, collecting testimony that led to dozens of new indictments. Santiago's empire had been built like a spiderweb. But now, with the center destroyed, the strands began to collapse. For many communities affected by his operations, the fall of Santiago was more than a headline. It marked the beginning of real change. At the heart of this collapse was data gathered from Freedom Steps, the facility that had once been a front but had now become a symbol of hope. The recordings, blueprints, and financial trails collected through Diana's deep cover work helped prosecute not just Santiago, but also the corrupt business partners and officials who enabled him. Evidence presented in court proved that Santiago had paid off government employees in 2 different countries, used false charities to clean drug money, and set up scholarship funds as cover for moving money through international schools. One of the most shocking discoveries was a long-standing agreement between Santiago's businesses and a foreign shipping company that moved product disguised as construction materials. That deal had gone undetected for nearly 6 years. With that chain broken, entire routes were shut down. Narcotic seizures along those paths dropped sharply. In the field, the FBI began referring to it as the Santiago Silence. It was clear the ghost was gone. But while the Bureau's focus remained on dismantling the empire, one person remained outside the spotlight: Diana, or as the world still didn't know her, Agent Maya Reese. She had vanished from official rosters after the operation ended. Her name was sealed under federal protection, her involvement known only to a few senior officials. She had not returned to headquarters, had not granted interviews, and had not accepted the internal commendations offered to her. Instead, Maya chose silence. Her last message to her handler was short: "Let the work speak. I'm going offline." Her apartment lease was terminated. Her bank accounts closed. The Bureau respected her decision. She had given years of her life, risked everything, and delivered results few operatives ever achieved. She had done what wiretaps, drones, and informants could not. She became part of Santiago's family. She gained his trust. And when the moment came, she held her ground. That, the Bureau agreed, was enough. As for Nico Santiago, his fate was handled with utmost care. After his father's arrest, the Bureau worked with child welfare agencies and federal family services to place him under protection. A neutral guardian was chosen, a physical therapist and former educator who had no ties to law enforcement but had worked at Freedom Steps. The goal was simple: give Nico a life outside of his father's shadow. His name was changed. His record sealed. He was moved to a quiet city under a federal child protection program. He was enrolled in a private school and continued physical therapy at a local center. For months, he didn't speak about his father. He didn't ask about the estate. But he asked about Diana. Again and again. Will she visit? Can she call? Where is she? No answers were given. Eventually, he stopped asking. But his guardian noted something remarkable. Nico continued to walk. And more than that, he continued to dance. Back at the real Freedom Steps, which now operated as a public nonprofit, staff members hung a framed photo near the entrance. It wasn't of Diana. It was of a small group of children dancing in a circle, their mobility devices tucked beside the walls. Below it, a quote: "First steps are never perfect, but they are always powerful." That quote, taken from Diana's final report, became the mission statement of the organization. Freedom Steps expanded, opening 2 new locations in different states. They partnered with medical centers, pediatric therapy groups, and public schools to offer services to children with disabilities, most of whom could never afford private care. The program that had once been a tactical trap was now saving lives. And though few knew its origin story, the center stood as a quiet tribute to the agent who risked her identity to make it possible. In a way, her presence remained, In the walls, in the routines, in the lives being changed. Santiago's sentencing had not brought closure to everyone. Some of his former victims, the families affected by overdoses, the communities scarred by violence, wanted more. They wanted to know how he escaped justice for so long, how many officials helped him, how the money moved. Operation Ember, still active, worked to answer those questions. But justice doesn't always arrive at once. Sometimes it comes in layers: arrests, trials, seizures, new investigations. And sometimes it never feels complete. But for federal agents watching the case unfold, Santiago's downfall was proof that no one, not even a ghost, was beyond reach. It was a message to every criminal enterprise hiding behind false names and private estates: you can't outrun the truth forever. Eventually, someone will notice. Someone will listen. And someone somewhere will get close enough to see who you really are. And when that happens, even empires fall. As of 1 year after the arrest, over 60 people had been charged in connection with Santiago's network. Several cases were still pending. International partners continued to investigate shell companies and accounts tied to Santiago's offshore holdings. More than $300 million in property had been seized or frozen. And Freedom Steps had served over 400 children across 3 states. But there was one thread left untied: Maya. She was never seen again. Some believe she left the country. Others say she returned to private life under a new name. A few close colleagues suggest she's still working, deep undercover somewhere else. The Bureau won't say. Her file is locked. But inside a restricted office in Washington, D.C., her report titled "The Dance" is used in training sessions for new undercover agents. Recruits are told, this is how it's done. Not with violence. Not with speed. But with patience, purpose, and the courage to follow someone into darkness and bring them back into the light. On the anniversary of Santiago's arrest, a quiet memorial was held at Freedom Steps, not for the drug lord, but for the mission. Staff lit candles, played soft music, and held a moment of silence. In the back of the room, Nico stood with his guardian, watching. He didn't speak. He just listened.